Hi, everyone. I'm Weslee Hill, and I am one of the ministers of congregational care at Brentwood United Methodist Church. And we are so glad that you all have joined us tonight for I think it's our third in a series called Resiliency and Hope. And it's conversations based on mental wellness and building up our resilience, but also finding hope in the middle of some struggles. And before we begin this month's Zoom session, I'd like for us to open with some prayer. So if you wouldn't mind bowing your heads with me. Abba, Father, we ask that you join us in this time tonight. We admit that there are many things pulling our attention, and I ask that you help us to focus tonight on what you would have us to hear. Father, you told us that there would be dark days. You told us that we would face hard times and that we would struggle. You never hid from us that we would face challenges and that there would be trouble in this world. Thank you for loving us enough to be honest with us about those things. And thank you for not leaving us there alone. You have warned us of difficult things, God, but you also reminded us to be hope-filled. You have reminded us to not be afraid. You have called us to be courageous and not to despair. You are our comforter. You are our rock. You are a mighty fortress. You hem us in before and behind us, God. You never forsake us. In you, God, there is hope. Help us to see that hope tonight. Amen. All right. Just like the last time, like I said, we've done this a couple times before, but just like the last time, our three counselors who are the therapists that we work with at Brentwood United Methodist Church. We have John Fite, who is a counseling psychologist who specializes in individual and couple therapy for adults, adolescent individual therapy, and both executive and life coaching. We have Dr. Jim Wellborn. He is a clinical psychologist who specializes in individual, family, and group psychotherapy with children and adolescents. And we have Stacy Jagger, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in restoring the connection between children and their parents. So thank y'all for coming back for round 3.
Pleasure. Love it.
We're glad that y'all are here. And before we get started on our topic, I want to remind everybody to go ahead and submit questions. We'll have a little bit of conversation around the topics of despair and isolation, depression, grief, those kinds of things. And then we'll answer some questions too. So go ahead and submit those and we'll get to those in a little bit. And also, if you haven't had a chance or taken the time to go and see the first 2 sessions that we've done, I highly encourage that. A lot of what we do is we kind of build on what we've done in the previous conversations we've had. So we'll bring up some more of those things tonight too. And if you haven't had a chance to do that, make sure you go back and look at those too. I know for me, when I'm getting ready for these, I go back and listen to them and I hear something different every single time. So to get us started, I'm going to have a little bit of honest confession as we start tonight. I went back and looked in my journal, and on January 1st, I wrote how I was struck by the hope that a new year brings and the weight of the reality of what is still going on, even though the calendar has changed. And I'm wondering how many people are still sitting in that same space like I am. That's kind of where my mind has been lately. The end of last week, I went for a run, which is a normal coping mechanism for me. And I normally do it in the morning, but I had to do it in the afternoon because of things that were going on in that morning. And I normally go run outside, and where I go to run is a big open space. And halfway down the road, about 1.5 miles in, I started getting almost a claustrophobic feeling. I was actually thinking about this conversation and what we were going to talk about. But there had been, at the end of last week, it was a new year. There had been political turmoil. Two of my three kids started virtual learning. One I have quarantined because of an exposure. It's just one thing after another. And I was like, okay, well, I can push through. It will be okay. I can do this. But about mile 3, I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I was still a mile and a half away from my car, so I had to walk back. And I just realized how much of what's going on I'm carrying physically. And again, I wonder how many other people are sitting in that same space. What are y'all seeing?
Okay, so I think that's kind of a general question. My first thought tonight, Weslee, was that
Wait, are you asking us?
Yes, you're the experts here.
Oh, right. We're the ones.
I already introduced
That's
you, remember?
okay. So my first thought is, the pandemic goes on, and so does this series. So we have a goal to last one more day than the pandemic.
This is adding to people's desperate hope that the pandemic will stop so that we'll stop having these meetings.
That's right. So I wanted to start with a quote. It's kind of a serious quote, but the rest of the night will be light. So here's the quote. I dug deep, and here's one from Viktor Frankl, who is, many of you know, is a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps in World War II and went on to become a much admired author and speaker. And his quote is, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." Again, he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. And I think that's, we've all experienced a little degradation in quality of life. In the pandemic, we can't hug each other, for goodness sakes, as many, safely. And there's been losses in that. But we have a why. For some of us, it's just simply to survive on the other side, and to be reunited with people. And, for many of us, it's try to take this nasty old pandemic and make something out of it that, makes the world a better place. But, to answer your question, people are, expressing exactly the things you talked about, the literal weight of the pandemic, especially in the winter and in the midst of all this blackness. And also that sense of paralysis that we spoke of in the first series, just that here we are with something that's unprecedented in our lifetimes. We don't really know how to handle it. And it's hard to know what to do. Our usual markers aren't good guides. So those are my thoughts.
Well, one of the things well, there's two things that I was thinking about you talking about for you running and that being a part of your kind of regular regimen of things that you do. The first is that you said you'd already run 3 miles and you had a mile and a half left to go. And so I'm thinking, oh Lord, okay, that's like, that seems, okay. So, but I'm not a runner and I don't like exercise. And so the idea that you've got, I think I'll just pause at 3 miles. For me, it would be like after maybe a mile, I'd be crawling back to wherever I was supposed to. Okay. So that was the first thing I thought about is that 3 miles. Okay. But the other thing, the more professional and hopefully appropriate thing that I was thinking about has to do with the one of the critical core features of what helps you have resilience in the face of stress and difficulty. And that has to do with things that are associated with taking care of yourself physically. And as we know from this, Stacy is particularly likely to have things to say about that. She's a particular proponent about paying attention to the body and yourself and kind of your healthy behaviors. But that was the thing that occurred to me is that getting sleep, making sure you have exercise, making sure you're eating well and in healthy ways, those kinds of things are just kind of the beginning of making sure that you're more likely to be resilient when you're dealing with stress or difficulty or challenges that you face.
I will just add in that I'm struck by several of my clients who are finding the exceptions, in that I have 2 clients right now that prior to the pandemic, both of them wanted to write a book. And the narrative was always, I don't have time. I just have too many things going on, too many activities. And one of my clients in particular has not only finished like a 600-page book, but she's now on her 2nd book. And she's very just, she's not living in la la land. I mean, she knows what's happening around her, but she's found the exception of the one thing that she can focus on, that she has control over. And that is, she has a pen and paper and has taken a dream of hers that she's had for many years. And because of the pandemic, it has made enough space for her to do what she's always wanted to do, which I personally find very inspiring. So I think if we can find the exceptions, those things that we, prior to the pandemic wanted to make time for, that require a lot of solitude, that this is kind of like the time to take advantage of it, and if you'll remember pre-pandemic, I had a client tonight said, it's just kind of nice that things have been dialed down a bit. Like she's saying, I wanted things to be dialed down and now they are. And there's some things that I don't want to go back the way that they were. And I've had a number of clients tell me that they're finding the exceptions of the things that that they just realize that in some sense their quality of life is better and not worse. So there you go. There's my 2 cents on that.
So people are, what's that?
Well, it makes me think of Stacy talking about that, and what her clients are discovering of this is one element of resiliency is both the being able to weather and navigate the immediate thing that you need to have resilience with, some kind of stress or difficulty or challenge. But then there's kind of the other side of that, on the back end of that. And for the longest time in the areas of clinical stress treatment for clinical issues of stress, there was a lot of emphasis on post-traumatic stress disorder as a dramatic and traumatic aspect of ways in which stress can really throw you for a loop and lock you down and disrupt things. But it's in the last decade or so, especially, there's been the recognition and increased study of what's called post-traumatic growth. And I really like the idea about that because it recognizes that while the trauma is still traumatic, there's no way around it. It doesn't change that it's traumatic. But one of the things that happens with post-traumatic growth is that people who go through trauma, and in this case, the complete disruption of every kind of routine and all that we have, you then have the potential of seeing new things, of recognizing that this which was just taken for granted actually could be a choice. That the kinds of things like Stacy was talking about with her clients, of things that you can do that you could technically make time for, but would have to actually do all of this stuff to make that happen. Since this has occurred, it opens up the possibility for that. And so that the same thing that kind of just dovetailing on what Stacy's talking about is absolutely the potential here for looking at the possibilities of what are here, of what this presents, rather than just focusing on how disruptive it is, which it is, and how difficult it's been and is, which it has been and is, those kinds of things. That post-traumatic growth has just been a really striking concept, and there's increasingly folks who are writing about that, about how to kind of make use of that and have that be something that you pay attention to also.
I love that idea of growth after that trauma.
Yeah.
I think that's one of when I was in school getting my degree. One of my supervisors had me list out all of these, she had me name three people and then do three different characteristics of them, both positive and negative ones. And what she had me do was look at each characteristic in a way that it could be positive, but it also could be negative.
Mm.
And if you look at an event like the pandemic, you can choose to look at it as here are the negative things that are coming from it, or flip side of the exact same event, here are the positives that are coming from it.
Right.
Same thing, just depends on which side of the coin you're looking at. So I think I love that idea of growth coming out of those things. Which especially in the darker months when there's a lot of depression and seasonal affective disorder and despair and I mean you can really get bogged down in that.
Right, which happens anyway this time of year. As therapists, that's something we're of course very familiar with, is that gets exacerbated during this time of year. But then when you add all of the things that have piled things on top of a process that can occur in some ways has a natural component to it, it creates a particular level of stress and challenge.
A metaphor that I heard one time, I believe from a minister, to describe this time was she described it as the fallow time. The time where the seed is actually in the ground.
Right.
And it appears that nothing is happening, but actually that's the first step in germination to create the growth that we all, witness and love in the spring.
So what are some things that you would recommend that as we are the seeds looking like we're not doing a whole lot, what are some of those things that we can be doing now that will help us move from that weightiness, that potential sadness or despair? How can we move that to growth?
Well, there's no end, just like there's no end to the creativity of human beings. There's so many different things that we can do. Some of them, are going to be stronger for each individual. For example, as you were talking about running, I was thinking how wonderful that is, and that's part of a routine. You described it, and that routine is the structure that often helps us through a difficult time. When you think about people, I've read astronauts who were in space for long periods of time, or people who survive solitary confinement. Having a schedule of things that you do over and over again is something that really helps, for that. And, the only thing that would have made that better, perhaps, is if you were running and you had someone to run with,
That was this morning.
So you've got it all.
Runners.
That's Wednesday mornings at 5. If anybody wants to come join us, it's Wednesday mornings at 5. Start.
I'll park the car and sit and read while y'all run and then greet you when you come back.
Great.
Since you guys are talking about exercise, I'll just pipe in from a place of weakness, because I think that's sometimes helpful to come from a place of weakness rather than strength. And I'll tell you, I'm a mother of 4 children, have a very busy private practice. And the one thing that I've talked to Dr. Wellborn about this in the past, like, how do you make it work? Like, how do you get your exercise in? And it's just been like the bane of my existence. If I'm totally honest, I hate to exercise. I truly do. But here's the thing, and my doctor told me this about a week or 2 ago, because I was like, yeah, but it's raining. Yeah, but it's cold. Yeah, but And he was like, Stacy, just put your coat on and your hat on and your gloves on and get out in the cold. The cold is good for you. And so I have, since the beginning of the year, I told my husband, I was like, I am going to move my body because y'all, look, I'm sitting in a chair all day with people. Like, I got to get up. So anyways, I want to share from a place of weakness that I have been exercising since the beginning of this year. I feel better. I feel more in my own skin and my own body. Things are becoming more manageable for me. I'm not feeling quite as on edge for no reason. And these are the things that I tell people every day. And I'm preaching to myself from a place of weakness. And sometimes I think that's really helpful for my clients to know, look, I'm a real person. You know, I'm a mama and I'm a human being. And so all that to say, for those of you that hate to exercise, get your coat on, get your hat on, and get your good attitude on, and get out there in the cold and just and do it, because you're going to feel so much better. And trauma is really stored in the body, and the more that you move your body, the more it kind of, you know, flushes out of you, and you just start to feel like you can do life easier. So there's that. I want y'all to do your weaknesses next.
We're doing
Okay, I thought
confessions
mine were
tonight.
all self-evident. I'm the one, I can't hide mine. You look all like, I would think, oh, Stacy must run like 5 miles a day from
No,
the book. Okay.
but I'm headed that way, I'm telling you.
Come join me.
At 5 o'clock, only Jesus and
Well,
Mary are up that early. Okay.
I'm thinking about the aspect of kind of what to do that it was coming to my mind. When you're saying, it actually was sparked, Stacy, when you're saying, you know, you need to just get a good attitude, which I thought, okay, well, that's not going to happen, because if I go, I'm going to be cussing the whole time that I'm walking. I'll be walking, but we can't have children near me, because that's the only way I can deal with the suffering that it's going to cause for me. But what that brought to mind was the idea of also being really careful about what you expose yourself to. And I don't mean the elements like winter, I mean negativity. And so this is about the way in which media is influencing us. This is the way in which the events that are going on in our country across this time, while we're also dealing with the pandemic. But it's being very attentive to the impact of the kind of messages that you're getting from the people or the sources of information, which are through people, written or visual or whatever, that we don't pay attention to that. We tend to just take it because it's just evolved into our kind of context. But we're also spending a lot more time in the context where that can be even more than we've normally been exposed to. And then there's all of the concern and anxiety and stress and fear that's going on. That's more than usual. There's enough that's just typical for how media presents things and the kind of things we can get. And so pay very close attention to what kind of messages you're exposing yourself to. And that's also related to, you know, the other thing about the complication of not being able to gather as a church community, as a church family, is that even though you can get the message from the online, you know, the pulpit, from the online participation, you don't interact with folks who have shared views about things, who have ways in which you, just by passing them a hallway or seeing folks, the same thing that our kids have struggled with, and whether they knew it or not, with the problems with school and how it's been reorganized. So that means to me, it's that much more important to pay attention to what are the messages that are coming in. And that's both limiting that, but also selecting. One of the things we've got in some of the resources that on the resource page are different places that you can go to get positive messages about things. The things that kind of filter through, there's all kinds of things that happen in the world all the time. News media tends to focus, for reasons of psychological attention, on sex and violence, because that tends to orient human beings. But there's a lot more than that going out in the world, but how to find that is not necessarily so easy. And so there's some resource sites on internet websites and that kind of business that gather those things that you and just kind of give you that remind you about the importance of that.
One of the things I would add that in looking at ideas for this presentation, one of the people I looked at was Scott Kelly, who was an astronaut who was up in space for a year, and he made some of those same points that Jim's making. He said, don't listen to social media, listen to experts, be clear about, who you're selecting to influence you and why. Last night, I was listening to a national town hall with the group Braver Angels, which is kind of a group trying to bring political sides together. And there was an African-American minister, a conservative from Western Kansas, who was making the point that kind of similar to what Stacy was saying, is kind of leading from our humanity and humility to understand that none of us have a monopoly on truth. All of us have some kind of point of view, which includes the fact that we don't know everything, can't possibly know. So when we focus on the humanity of the other people, which is sometimes harder to do when you don't see as many real people, you just see dots on the screen, but when we do focus on their humanity and our own humility, then that, reduces some of that social stress that's been ramped up because of our season of our culture, and also because we're spending so much time indoors, potentially, much to Stacy's chagrin, watching screens.
Okay, remember she's got 4 kids though, so there's extra motivation for her to get out with her coat on out of the house. And so
I'll address that just briefly. Believe it or not, I still have families that are implementing the 30-day blackout in the middle of this whole pandemic. And what people don't understand about the blackout is that you are reducing screen time dramatically. You're getting rid of anything that doesn't include what you have to do for work and school. So I'm very aware that people have to work and have to do school. But the reality is that kids are in front of screens all day for school, and then they're staying on their screens for video games and movies, and they're not getting up, kind of like me, but
All right, you've done the 30
wait
days.
a minute.
anyway, but all that to say, I'm working on congruency in 2021. But back to the kid thing, please get your children outside. They
Yes.
cannot stay inside all day long in front of a screen. And, it's amazing to me what can happen with a young child if you don't do anything else but remove this. And I even have parents that are like, you're right. I have families that have chosen to take their televisions out of their living rooms, out of their bedrooms. And instead of having 17 and a half televisions in their home, they just have one TV in their bonus room. So the rest of their house, it's no longer the central focus of their family's life. And it's amazing just by doing that one thing that, screens were never intended for us to be disconnected with. The original intention was for us to gather around it as a family and watch, something together.
Yeah.
And so the families that are doing the blackout are implementing the blackout, that are removing their screens from their bedrooms and even their living room, believe it or not, and putting it into just one dedicated space where they can gather again as a family to watch family movies and whatever they want to do. It blows my mind of how willing children become very quickly to want to cook and want to draw and want to get the Play-Doh out and want to, play a musical instrument. And, kids, if you take the screen away, they're hardwired to connect, and they're really made to be creative. And so just by doing that one thing, they will figure it out. They will, they'll turn things into paper airplanes, and, sticks become, anyways, kids are naturally creative. And so I can't say enough about, please get your children outside and consider being different. You know,
But
it's
there's
okay to
another,
be unique and different and take the screens out of your various rooms.
there's another dimension to that, Stacy, which you talk about too, which is about, it also makes it kind of channels the kid's influence back to you as a parent. Okay, you're going to have direct interaction with them. You're going to have conversations. You're going to express and demonstrate and promote the values and the ethics and the morals and character issues that are important, and also build and kind of secure that relationship with them, because those screens, of course, also keep us in a family unit to be divided in all these spaces, as opposed to operating as a unit and having the opportunity for the kind of influence you need as a parent on your kids to build those core values that are the things that guide whatever they end up deciding to do. The core values that you inculcate in them is what kind of stays with them and provides the rudder. And otherwise, you're leaving that to whoever they're being exposed to and whatever they're being exposed to on the screens through media. So there's layers of benefit to that. That makes that, of course, really important.
And just the ability to be quiet. You know, it's okay to just have, like, to hear nothing. Like, it's really okay. John, you were going to say something.
Sure. I was going to say, to me, just as important is that in that reduced noise, you know, you're able to see each other, and with children and parents and husbands and wives, most importantly, you're able to see those moments of vulnerability where you can offer safety to that other person, where they can feel that you're genuinely turning toward them. The opposite of the opposite of loneliness is not being with someone. The opposite of loneliness is being known. It's entirely possible to be in a family or to be in a marriage and be quite lonely, without a pandemic. And the pandemic creates that opportunity to really see each other, to really hear each other.
I had an interesting conversation with my 16-year-old. And it kind of goes with a lot of the things that y'all are talking about. I was in the middle of a prayer meeting, prayer Zoom, and he comes into my room and his eyes are this big. And it was last Wednesday. And he had been on Instagram. And he comes into my room and he's like, thankfully that Zoom was ending. And I was like, what is wrong? And he said, do you know what's going on? And I had gotten a message and I had just kind of dismissed it. And so I talked with him for a second. We talked about what was going on. He had gotten his message from social media. But then I reminded him, I said, yes, this is going on, but let's walk to the front door. And we walked to the front door and I said, this is also what's going on. Our front door is going on. Our neighbors across the street who are cutting down the tree, that's going on. This family that's nothing like us is talking to the next family that's nothing like them. They don't have the same political views. They don't have the same religious views, but they're in their yards talking to each other 6 feet apart. But, that is also still going on. So when we talk about disconnecting from screens, when we talk about making sure that we're getting the information that we need from positive sources, when we're talking about parents being the people that kind of ground your kids, not saying I did that perfectly, that was just an example of something that worked. But those are kind of, I think, as all of y'all were kind of talking about this, that came to mind. And eventually he was like, all right, I'm good. He's like, I'm going to get rid of Instagram. I said, that might be a good idea right now. You know, but it's those kinds of things I think that y'all are talking about. And when we talk about these things, sometimes we're like, well, but it wouldn't fit here. But I have a 16-year-old, and because we have conversations a lot, I was very thankful that he knew that he could come to me for that safety. But again, that involves all of what y'all are talking about. We do have a question, I think that's kind of, I'm going to put this one in here.
Question. This is so
Question,
exciting.
but it's really good because it fits with this kid and this kind of
That's
stuff.
better.
So the question is, how do you deal with a 3-year-old who has not been able to play with other children for a year? I'm worried about how his social development will be impacted by only having contact with 2 dedicated parents. Open to suggestions, exclamation point.
That's yours, Stacy.
Yeah.
Stacy.
So the truth is that a 3-year-old does not require preschool. A 3-year-old does not require lots of peer interaction. That age, what they need more than anything else is a safe attachment experience with their primary caregivers. And so I'm not reducing the anxiety that the parents are feeling from not getting a break, because that's kind of a different thing. But what a 3-year-old needs is to feel seen, heard, celebrated, and delighted in by their primary caregivers in their formative years, which is, the first 3 to 6 years of life is very, very crucial as far as gaining their sense of self, their attachment style. Do they have a secure attachment style or an insecure attachment style? All that to say, there's many resources for parents with young children that you can do one-on-one dyadic, one-on-one play. My favorite intervention for that age is through the TheraPlay Institute. I'm happy to share that link if you would like for me to. The TheraPlay Institute has a flip chart of attachment-based play activities that are beautifully choreographed with a child that's 3 years old. So really what a 3-year-old needs is time in nature, stations, like you could do a station of Play-Doh, a station of arts and crafts, a station of Legos, then you go outside, then you come home, then you cook something together, then they take a nap, hopefully for 3 hours so you can clean the house.
I want that now.
Call a friend and tell them you're about to lose your mind. I have a 4-year-old, by the way. So, my 4-year-old, yes, he loves his friends, but and 3 and 4 are very different. But a 3-year-old needs eye-to-eye contact with their primary caregivers, in as much love, hugs, cuddles. You can still co-sleep with a 3-year-old. I mean, they need security and 5 senses experiences in nature. So I know you're losing your mind. You need like a break. I get that. But I wouldn't be concerned about your child's mental well-being and not seeing his or her peers right now. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah,
Y'all are welcome to chime in.
Stacy, one of the things that also reminds me about, which is implicit to me in what you're talking about, and also it kind of links in to the ways in which the disruption has created a difference, is that this notion that we evolved into in the United States, that kids need to be involved with all of these things and all of these activities, and parents need to be getting their kids to be doing all of these things. And the reality is, part of what you're talking about is, I was thinking it could also be the case that parents thinking, in order for my child to be healthy, they've got to be involved with this, gymnastics and swimming and the pre-K and peer relations, time with their peer play and that kind of stuff, because we've come to think that scheduling them into all of these things is really important. And that got really disrupted by the pandemic, but with parents thinking they're supposed to do that. And so you can end up having a lot of anxiety that you're failing your kid because they're not doing all those things that they're supposed to be doing, when it turns out that the research has been increasingly clear that over scheduling, it's not necessary for there to be all of that activity. For kids to be involved with things and participate and to have meaningful and fulfilling and fun activities is important. But that's not the same as thinking that there's a problem if you don't have them engaged in all of these specific kinds of tasks. So I'm wondering whether that might also be an aspect of that. It's certainly an aspect of parents, even of teenagers, which are the kind of kids that I'm most likely to work with, sometimes start worrying about that somehow their kids are missing out if they don't have those kinds of activities.
One thing I would say also is that one thing that matters a lot for kids of all ages are the mental health of the parents.
Mhm.
It's been really stressful. We know from science that couples, when they have small children in the home, that's usually the most stressful stage of marriage.
Mhm.
People often describe it as miserable together. And there's a lot of
I remember that.
there's a lot of what appear to be zero-sum decisions, meaning who's going to get to go for the run today.
It's Stacy. Apparently in Stacy's house, it's Stacy who gets to go. She married well. See you later, baby. I'll be back in about 2 hours.
So there's a lot of opportunities to practice those compromise skills, other growth activities.
All right.
All right, we got another question. We're going to kind of switch gears just a little bit, kind of. This person's asking for us to comment on depression masking itself as anger.
Whoa. Okay, boy, we dove right into clinical stuff here, didn't we?
We're digging in and swimming.
Well, I think my first reaction is to say that, of course, at any age, irritability can be part of depression. I see it very frequently among teenagers, that irritability
Exactly.
is part of the picture of depression. And of course, depression among teenagers is just about at epidemic levels. It was before the pandemic, and teenagers and young people in general have been really hurt, by the pandemic. Their sense of well-being for many. I'm going to turn it over to Jim now.
Well, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. And it's especially true for teenagers. And I'm going to talk about normatively the frequency of that with teenage boys. Now, that's not exclusive, because anybody can have this kind of shifting of either a shifting of what the primary emotional state is that you're expressing or dealing with, or you can have the situation where you're only focusing on one. Because one of the things that's really useful about anger is that it's an energizing emotion, and depression is a de-energizing emotion. So you're just kind of weighed down, and so that there's a way in which some transformation of depression, when it's of course desirable for you to actually address and deal with depression. But if you're just naturally trying to navigate that, you can translate that into anger as a way of having more energy and having more action, as opposed kind of in contrast to the depression. So one thing is about the way in which we can transform emotions. And that's especially true for boys and men, because we're socialized to suppress and not acknowledge the more vulnerable emotions still, even these days. And so that means that for boys and men, normatively still, not universally, but normatively, when you're scared, you're mad. When you're sad, you're mad. When you're upset, you're mad. When you're hurt, you're mad. When you're lonely, you're mad. Everything becomes, and so some of our work, all of us, in the various ages around that we work in, and then in adulthood, where it continues can continue in many people, you actually have difficulty recognizing what the underlying emotion is. And so the thing that's nice about this question is that this person actually recognizes that there's complexity there, okay? But lots of times that can happen, that you just find yourself mad all the time, and it really turns out there's other stuff going on. So that's another kind of level of this. But then there is the issue about it being difficult sometimes to really be able to manage that you're having simultaneous emotions. So multiple emotions at the same time. And we have to learn as human beings how to actually recognize and balance those things, to be able to actually carry anger and sadness and hurt and excitement and fear, any combination of those at the same time. So there are some of the ways to do that. Kind of the beginning way to do that is to understand that that's possible and to start looking underneath. And so if you're mad all the time, for example, there's real value in you looking underneath that to say, what else, I'm going to say it this way, is also going on, okay? And that means that, so this is things that you can do just yourself. Now, there's all kinds of stuff, of course, all of us can do, that therapists can do and be helpful with. But that understanding and appreciation that sometimes the emotion that you're most aware of is not necessarily the actual core emotional experience that you're going through. And if you get it wrong, so if you're sad rather than mad, but mad is much more comfortable for you, you will be unsuccessful in addressing what's making you sad, because you will be addressing it by what you're mad at, which is a whole different set of responses than what you would do for something that makes you sad. So if you mistake that, then you're not going to be able to resolve that underlying emotion, which is why it's important to work on being more aware of what's going on so that you can be more clear about what you need to try and address or that you're struggling with.
When I'm working with a young child, I'll talk about how anger, if this is an iceberg, the anger is at the very top, that you can see. And then underneath that might be the sadness or the hurt or whatever really is really going on with you. And so if you can kind of get underneath the anger and allow yourself to feel the sadness, and some easy things you can do, if you'll allow yourself to do them, are creative, expressive arts kind of things that you don't have to be a professional. I mean, you can just get paper and watercolors and maybe just paint with your non-dominant hand and just let yourself feel the sadness while you're painting. You can doodle draw. You can, there's 50 million things you can do. I mean, if you can look up art therapy on, just Google art therapy activities, you can find 50 million things to do to express sadness through expressive arts, things that very simple materials that you can use that are at home.
And that's adult. She's talking about the whole range. Kids can do that and benefit from that, but all of us can. There's real value. And sometimes it's really surprising it can be really surprising that you go through that activity, and it can be fun, it can be enjoyable. But when you stop and look at it, things start being clear about, whoa, there's like a lot of red and a couple of knives in there. And so that's telling me maybe I've got some things going on. So there's
the thing about the expressive arts is that it allows you to have an expression of it rather than it sticking inside of you and you can't put words to it, because sometimes you just don't really need words. You can express it with art or express it with crayons or clay. There's so many things that you can do to feel your feelings without having to put words to it, and allowing yourself to feel it, which allows you to do something other than drinking that other bottle of wine or glass of wine or that seventh brownie or whatever. It gives you a different.
New brownies. I wish you had mentioned.
John's laughing
Okay.
at me.
Damn it.
Okay, John.
All right, we've got one more question. Because when we're almost out of time, so I want us to get to this one because it's a good one too. This person says it's lonely in January and winter, and I've lost a parent. You mentioned routines, exercise. What else can I do to help with isolation?
I would say that anyone who's watching this, has some communications tools at their disposal, and there are so many lonely people out there, especially older people who are really suffering in the pandemic. I talk to my 90-year-old aunt every day who lives alone, because cajillions of people who are lonely, but call us, call Weslee.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do fancy communications. You can just reach out on the phone or even send a card or letter. The more you communicate, the more you can feel known and know other people. And this complicated web of life is what carries us through. So be part of it.
And related, that this kind of feeds back into, we were talking earlier about the importance of minimizing your participation in social media and kind of being online and using screens. But this is one of those situations where the social media and the opportunity to be able to interact through distance of this has been a godsend for people who are isolated when there wasn't a pandemic and when they have particular kinds of needs for support that aren't broadly available in the community, or they haven't been able to either effectively find or comfortably find. But this provides an avenue for doing it. And so it doesn't mean that social media and the opportunity for connecting through the internet is all bad. It's when it's become so dominant or exclusive. But you can go on and find an extraordinary array of groups and groups of people and gathering places online to talk about a remarkable diversity of things that are of interest. And so form relationships and communities. And of course, the foundational one, which we always come back to, is the church, is your church home. That is one of the foundational core critical aspects to me about a church community, is that connection itself. And so there's all kinds of things that happen through the church also.
Well, and we have several classes that have just started this past week. I did an Enneagram class this morning, and there are several different ones that are starting up soon too. So that's a place to go. If you go to the Bumsy website and go to, I think it's adults, they have a list of classes that are there too, and they're Zoomed. But it is, I mean, it was a Zoom room of 20 people, maybe I knew 2. And so that kind of creates more of that community as well. And it's a place to be vulnerable, and it's a place to open up and have connections and that kind of stuff. So that's a good place too.
And I've shared this before, but it's worth noting again that 12-step recovery meetings, where they used to be, many of them were in person. Because of the pandemic, most all of them are on Zoom now, which has made recovery much more accessible to a lot of people that could not make meetings happen in their day, in their schedule. So there's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Al-Anon, there's ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, there's Emotions Anonymous, there's Narcotics Anonymous. I mean, ad nauseum, the amount of recovery options that you.
A plethora of wonderful.
A plethora of, yeah. Pick one. We all belong to one at this point. Pandemic Anonymous.
That's where I was headed to.
Yeah. PA. What's the name?
Zooms over Zooms. Thankful for them though. All right. Any final thoughts that you all have before we sign off? Oh, wait. Oh no, y'all go with that first. And if I have time, I'll add my thing.
See, I don't know quite what to say. I would just mostly say, keep coming back. We're going to do this again. We're still in a pandemic. I'm going to predict this is going to be the low point this month. Hope I'm proven correct. Sometimes it feels like time slows down when you get closer to the solution, as you get right up near the front of the line. I'm excited by, better times ahead, but I know can't let our guard down, and we can get through this together.
And I'll just say that the thing that I tell young children a lot is to be reminded of what Mr. Rogers said, that when you see scary things in the news, to look for the helpers, to focus on the helpers. And that kind of helps you to focus on the positive instead of the scary stuff.
One of the things that comes to my mind is being aware of what are the kind of characteristics that foster a sense of hope, that sustain a sense of hope. And that's things like making sure that you do things that help with your optimism, that you do things to make sure that you recognize the promise and potential and possibilities that are out there, the prospects for things that are promising and interesting and enjoyable and meaningful, and that you intentionally and thoughtfully address those, keep those in mind, and make sure that you fill your lives with things that promote that. Because if you just drift and let life kind of come at you, especially with the role that media plays, then it gets shaped for us, as opposed to us making sure that we're looking for those things that help us have a kind of approach that continues to have us have a hopeful outlook on all the things that are possible.
Wonderful. Thank y'all so much. I hope that anybody who's listening and hasn't, or is watching and hasn't seen the first two, I hope that y'all will go back and look at those. For anybody who's wondering and is catching it on Facebook or on the podcast, it's bunc.net. Go over to the care page and you can either find Resiliency and Hope, which is where we'll have the resources too, but also down at the bottom, it has a link to our counselors. And if you all need if you need somebody to talk to, if you are wondering, what is some of this underlying stuff? I think it's anger, but maybe it's sadness, but maybe it's not. Call one of us, reach out to one of us. What's that?
We're really good at that.
Yes. Reach out. If you have questions, call us at the church. We're not at the church right now, but we have a pastor on call and they'll be able to direct you to us. So don't feel like you're in this alone. Thank y'all so much for bringing hope and helping us build resilience and learn how to do life and pandemic in a positive way. So we hope everybody will join us next week, or no, not next week, next month. And we'll see y'all then.
Bye, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.